of relevance to everyone. So the topic is the unchanging nature of truth. But I want to look at how science, mathematics, and logic point us back to the truth, one of God's word, two of the book of nature, as some Christian apologists put it. The idea that God created the world and has left it in such a way that we can learn about him through his creation. So we can learn about God through his creation, but we can also look at, of course, the word, the Bible. We can read the Bible and learn about God. But it's amazing how his fingerprints or his prints are so embedded in our world that you cannot study the world without it pointing back to him. So then you would willfully be moving away from the truth instead of moving to the truth if you were to say you still don't believe in him, because he has given the evidence, as Romans 1 says. So we'll go through a few things tonight. The first thing is we're going to talk about a little bit about my background, how I got to the U.S., and then we'll address a few issues with the universe. We'll address the scientific perspective. What areas do we see God's hand at work in science? What are the limits of science as a tool? Because science is just a tool and should not be something people put their trust in. It's just a tool. And then we look at the issues from mathematics. We look at the issues from logic. And then we look at some of the implications of creation. The fact that we were created, the fact that we know God made the heavens and the earth, and we know that God has placed us here for a purpose. What does that mean? What are the implications of the reality of creation? So quickly, let's run down and see some things as far as background. I was born in Nigeria. I grew up in Nigeria, which is in West Africa. About 180 million people, and it's the most populated country in Africa. And I came in 2007 to get my degree in chemistry. I was actually pre-med, and so the idea was to become a pediatrician. That was the initial plan. I wrote a book called Christianity 201 in 2009, where I go into detail as far as what happened to that plan. There were some things that happened that changed the course of my life, and I'm glad they happened. I'll share a few of them tonight. This is the map of Nigeria. The reason why I wanted to show the map was to give you an idea of where I grew up or where I was born in. So I was born in northeast Nigeria. Most of you have actually heard of it because of Voice of the Martyrs, and you've heard of the problems they've had with radical Islam and Boko Haram and so on and so forth. Some of that is actually going on in the state at the very top right corner that says Borno State. I was born in the state right below it, very close to Borno State. I was born in Adamawa State, and I grew up in Lagos, which is down at the bottom there of the country. Lagos is essentially the New York of Nigeria in terms of the economic capital. So that's where I grew up. I went to elementary school. I went to high school in Lagos. So, and then this is me in first grade. And the idea there, I think, my wife helped me pick out some pictures. And the idea was, part of it is to show, I guess, as a young man, a young boy, whether or not I liked it. And I think I did. I liked school a lot. And so this was when I took second in the class. And we not everybody got trophies in Nigeria. You actually had to be first, second, or third. And so I was blessed to be either first, second, or third from first to fifth grade. And so I thank God for the opportunity to study, to work hard, and then they give us awards here and there. So this was first grade. This is me in 12th grade. And I was the student body president, which was also a blessing. And the gentleman next to me was also the student body president after me. Now, it's very different when we talk about student body president, but the idea is you're given the responsibility to oversee. This was a boarding school. Most kids, a lot of kids go to boarding school in Nigeria. Some of our schools, you would have to travel for 3 hours to get to school one way. So it's not a good idea to even try that. I mean, you would leave home at 5, get there at 8 a.m., and then leave at 4, get home at 7 p.m., and that's just travel, and some days it could be worse. So boarding school situations are what makes the most sense. And so I went to boarding school, and one of the responsibilities of the student body president is essentially after the school day is up around 2:30, you essentially have to run the rest of the school, so about 1,500 students or so, for the rest of the day. You have to make sure that things are in order. You have to make sure that people get their meals, and if there's a problem, people come to you and all of that. So there's all these issues that you deal with, and that was a blessing. But believe it or not, I personally believe that one of the reasons I'm here today is because of what happened in 12th grade. It actually started in 11th grade when I became student body president, and it goes on. We call it the head boy or the school captain, but it goes on for about a year. And because of that experience, I was able to do some writing, some sharing at different schools after I graduated, because while I was waiting for my university in Nigeria, Some of the, sometimes it could take a year or two. While I was waiting, I decided to go out and share and encourage young people at different assemblies. And so during that time, someone from the U.S. Embassy heard and invited me in for a conversation. Now, I thank God for that opportunity, but part of the story is that it all started from back in, being a student body president. So sometimes God gives us, or we get opportunities that God, where God opens doors and we get opportunities. And I want to encourage us to make sure we strive to do our best in those little, opportunities, because sometimes He gives us further opportunities as we use what we have. So this was one of the things I was blessed to have, and I thank God for it. And again, part of why I'm here today is because I was able to, the stage was set with me getting a chance to lead. So when I went to speak at the secondary schools or the high schools, they would ask me, who are you? Why should we let you speak? Well, I was a student body president of that school, and then they actually listened. Yeah, we want to hear what you have to say. And so that was very helpful, and it all started here. The longer story is in my book, Christianity 201, which actually ended up, I think we're out of print on that one, but I can email if somebody wants to read the full story. The book on my website is called Why Do I Exist? And as I said, you guys can download it as a PDF. I put it there for free because I wanted people to get a chance to read more about the fundamentals of the Christian faith and how it influences how we live lives of purpose and meaning. Okay, so that's some of my background growing up. And then this is my wife, Stephanie. We've been married for about 8 years, and God has blessed us with 4 kids and 1 on the way. So these are the 4 kids. There are 3 boys and a girl. And the 5th one coming, God willing, is also a girl. And so we've been blessed with 3 boys and 2 girls. And that will be later this month for number 5. So we live in Superior, Wisconsin. It looks nothing like what's in the picture in the background this week. Some of you have heard that we were essentially paralyzed in terms of moving. Some people couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't go anywhere. The whole city, schools, everything shut down pretty much since last Wednesday. Tomorrow will be the first day people have gone to school, those who are going to school, because of the intensity of the snow we got. So can't believe you guys have none, but that's okay. And so my background academically, I have, as I said, a degree in chemistry. My minor was actually philosophy, but I did just as much work in philosophy as my chemistry degree because I enjoyed studying philosophy and studying the tools for critical thinking, I should say. There's a lot of things in philosophy that are problematic. And so my goal was essentially to try and shine the light of Christ, to try and witness in my philosophy class. And by God's grace, I had a lot of opportunities to share the truth of what I believed and why I was encouraging others to believe in God's word as well. My philosophy professor and I became very good friends through the process, even though we didn't agree on some fundamentals. I went to the University of Wisconsin, a public institution. And so even though we didn't agree on some things, he appreciated that I shared what I believed and where I stood. And till today, we still communicate once in a while. One of the classes that changed the course of my life was in 2009, and I'll tell you this is where it ties back into what we're discussing. In 2009, or it actually happened in 2008, but I took the class in 2009. I went to the philosophy professor. He was having coffee in the student lounge, and I just said, in the student center, sorry. And I went up to him and I said, I just want to tell you, I'm not taking your classes, but I understand what you teach. And I wanted to share with you that I am a Christian. And of course, he knew the law of non-contradiction. And what that meant is that if any of your students or if any of the readings are implying that there is no God, that we have a problem. Somebody is wrong because we're not both right. And I was polite about it. And I said, as a Christian, I just want you to know that there are people who believe strongly in the Bible, who believe in truth, and so on and so forth. And he said to me, he asked me a few questions about my faith, and I answered. And then he said, well, why don't you take my class and then we'll talk? Keep in mind, he didn't know me. I didn't know him. I just knew that he had taught that atheism essentially was, whether or not he taught that atheism was a possibility. The issue is that some people were going to philosophy and then saying that somehow the non-belief in God was something that had a premise. And I said, no, I don't think that's the case. So anyways, that was how I introduced myself politely. And he said, take my class and we'll talk. And so I said, sure, it's a philosophy of science. I'm studying chemistry. We're going to talk about science. And so I enrolled in philosophy of science. And that is part of why, again, so we look at a few things that, the Lord sets the stage for certain things to happen. And that's the other reason why I'm here today. If not, I probably would be attending to patients in the pediatric ward. But somehow God set the stage so that I found myself in philosophy of science, trying to share with people the truth of God's word, which then led me to move away from medicine, because April 1st, 2009 was the day that everything changed. And what happened was they invited an atheist, professor who was an atheist, or at least was leaning towards that, to share on his new book, which was explaining why suffering disproves the existence of God. And I shared with him some of my thoughts, some of which I had learned from Ravi Zacharias and some other people. But remember, I'm a junior in college. A professor comes in to share about their book, and I decide to say, no, I think there's a problem again. If God exists, then we can't both be right. And I mean, I prayed to God this morning, or I prayed to God, and I read his word. We have a problem here. And so, anyways, I shared my views, and they actually took us after the class to the faculty lounge, and they said, you guys got to dig it out and figure out what's going on here. So anyways, we had a chance to debate for about an hour, and I left that room, and I said, I cannot do it. I cannot sit in a room with a patient coming in and making some illogical claims, and then I have to just let them go. And so I'd rather deal with the mind. The problem is if I'm dealing with the mind, the patient might end up getting worse in terms of health. So I'm like, let's just focus on the mind. And so I thank God for those who invest their lives in medicine, but I was called more to teaching, and so that's what I decided to do. So in 2009, I left that track. My goal then was to get a PhD in biochemistry or the philosophy of science. That didn't end up working out, but the high school opportunity opened up. And because of the high school opportunity, I actually turned down any opportunities for a PhD. And the reason is, for the one school that I was really pursuing, the reason was because I thought, I'm still young. The young people will probably listen to me. If I go get a PhD, I'll be too old, right? And then some of them will think I don't know anything. So anyway, so I decided, why don't I just focus and use my youthful years to interact with the young people instead of getting a PhD. So anyways, long story, but it gives you some context of where the chemistry, the philosophy came together. Medical physics came from one of the students I was teaching. Her dad was a medical physicist, and that was how some of that happened. But all of the things I've experienced, somehow God works all things together for good. And I'm glad today, again, as I said, that I am not a pediatrician, partly because of some of the unnecessary cultural wars going on. But I'm just glad that I am where I believe I need to be in terms of focusing on teaching. So we're going to dive in to some things that have to do with science, mathematics, logic, and how they point us back to God, and how, hopefully, my hope is that you grow in your faith as we discuss these issues. Before I go further, I want to tell briefly what medical physics is, because some people have wondered, what is medical physics? And before I went into medical physics, I wasn't even fully sure what it was. I had studied some of the details in physics, but I never knew that they actually would subdivide into a specific category. There's three main branches of medical physics. There's the therapy physics, the diagnostic, and the nuclear medicine. So some medical physicists focus on treating cancer. I don't work in therapy physics. I work in diagnostic physics and nuclear medicine physics. And what I do is essentially ensure that patients don't get too much dose for the necessary image quality that the radiologist needs. So that's mostly what I do. And I focus on radiation safety, x-rays, and so on and so forth. Now, within some of that, we still see elements of God at work in terms of some of the discoveries we've had in physics. They cannot be explained just from a random universe, I would say. So that's medical physics. I hope it helps, but if it doesn't, then forget about it. But, okay, so what do we make of the intelligibility in the universe? What do we make of the implications of the intelligibility? And we're going to define what we mean by intelligibility. But the starting point is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the beginning. That's the premise for the Christian. There's two passages in Scripture that I believe that if the world understood where we stood on those issues, they might take a different dimension to having dialogue with us. The first one is Genesis 1:1 is not something we take as a guessing game. In Hebrews 11, it tells us faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. By faith, right? These people had a good report. Faith is a good thing in the Christian faith because, again, we recognize our limits. Everybody has faith, by the way. There's nobody who doesn't have faith. I don't know, when you buy your gasoline, I don't know if you actually put it into a different container, take it to a lab, examine it, and then say that was the 89 gas or 87 gas. You don't know that. You're assuming, you don't know, but you trust. When you sit down on the chair, you don't check how solid you just sit. Faith is exhibited all day, every day. So faith, and this idea of people tell you, oh no, I don't have any faith. You Christians have faith. That's not true. We all have faith to one degree or the other. Nobody knows everything, right? And I said in my philosophy class, I don't need to know everything. I just need to know someone who does. So nobody knows everything, but I'm fine in knowing the one who knows everything. And some people say, oh, I don't know anything, or you can't say that you know anything for sure. Well, no, we do know some things. It's impossible to know nothing. Because in order to know nothing, you would have to not know that you know nothing. It's impossible to not know anything. So at the default, you know something. The question then becomes, where do you put your life? Where does it rest? And for the Christian, we say we put it in God. And he's revealed himself enough for me to know I am in good hands. And there's no worry about that. And so I take a step back to tell you this. This is something that I discovered when I was teaching at a Bible school in Duluth one time. The issue of the discussion, I'll say this, maybe hopefully it wakes you up, and then we'll move on to the next slide. The issue of the evidence of the existence of God and so on and so forth, people say, oh, there's no God. I've actually come to realize that we have a problem. And the problem is, if God exists by his nature, then even if he did something in 1905 in West Africa, and he never did anything ever again, that means he still exists because he's eternal. If God exists once at any point, then he always exists. And if he doesn't exist, he can't begin to exist by his nature. So, and I've not had a chance to really talk to more people who might identify as atheists on this issue, but I just want them to understand that the question of God is not something like the question of a car or the question of something with finitude. It's not. It's the question of an infinite being with infinite knowledge that can exist anywhere. And for somebody to say that there is no God is to say there has never been a time in history past, or there will never be a time in the future, meaning that if God never has done anything, let's say, oh, he's never revealed himself, but he's going to reveal himself in 2050, that means he still already exists. So you're saying he has never done anything or will never do anything anywhere in the universe, period. That's a problem. We're still trying to figure out how to get to Mars. What audacity do we have to say that? Why do you think the Bible says it twice, not once? Psalm 14:1 and Psalm 53:1. The fool has said in his heart there's no God. It's not even a possibility. It's not in the realm of debate. Because we don't even have the capacity. I don't know when last you've listened to scientists talk about, or doctors, right? We've had 4 kids, and sometimes we go, and I told my wife, I'm beginning to question that this giving birth to kids and so on with the doctors who do that, I'm beginning to question if it's a science. Because they keep telling me I don't know about everything. When is the baby coming? I don't know, but we think. I'm like, really? Do we know anything? And yet we're telling people that there's no God when we haven't even figured out why babies show up when they show up? I think the human mind and the heart, and we all have to guard ourselves against it, has this tendency towards pride. This pride of, I know everything, right? And so, as a scientist, I say there's so much we don't know, but yet some scientists make it look like we figured it all out. Do you know how big the universe is? If you were to drive 100 miles back and forth, actually we're going to get there in a second, but if you were to drive 100 miles back and forth, essentially you would have to do that billions of times before you get to halfway of the universe. We're talking about a vast universe. We haven't even comprehended it. And if God has done a work somewhere in creating a star somewhere in the universe, he's done a work. So for you to tell me he's not there is to tell me that he's never done a work anywhere. Period. And that's a scary thought. But anyways, I say that to say, I didn't know this when I was writing my second book, but that was one of the issues I talked about in my book. And I transferred that to the new book, which is the evidence for the existence of God. Sure, there's 2 very good evidences that we use. We use the cosmological argument and we use the teleological argument. One of them talks about the beginning of time and one of them talks about the design in the universe. Very good discussions. But we'll talk about that. Unfortunately, I won't be able to get into that today. But what I'm trying to say is arguments are limited, but they do point us to believe the possibility of the existence of God. However, my new thing is I'm just going to deconstruct your worldview and hopefully let you figure out what you now believe. Because sometimes I don't need to necessarily tell you what I believe. I just need to show you why what you believe doesn't make sense. So now you have to answer, what are you? Because atheism is not an option. So Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Isaiah 40 is where God is telling us more about his nature and the fact that he created the world, and more details can be found in Isaiah 40, Job 38, Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God. So anyways, those are some scriptures that help lay the foundation of what we're discussing today. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. As we said, we know that there was a plan right from the beginning. So what is this word intelligibility? It's like my favorite word. If I could name someone, I want to name them that, right? Intelligibility. Intelligibility, which is used quite a bit by John Lennox, the mathematician out of Oxford. But intelligibility is the state or quality of being intelligible. But now we brought in another word. And intelligible is to be able to be understood or comprehensible. We brought in another word, so we have to go another level. Comprehensible is capable of being comprehended. So intelligibility deals with something being able to be comprehended. This universe can be comprehended. That's a problem if there is no God. Why can it be comprehended? Why is it that we can use mathematical symbols to better understand the nature of things? And why do we understand all these constants, the speed of light and this and that? Why do these things exist if it's all an accident? And it's not, of course, but I'm just trying to say these are things that people have to think about. Let's spend some time talking about the nature and the philosophy of science, because this is the first dimension. We're going to talk about science, we're going to talk about math, and then logic. And then we'll wrap it up, and then I'm looking forward to some conversation and any questions you have. So I was formally introduced to the philosophy of science in 2009, and the first book we read in the class, I don't know if you know this, but this might burst your bubble. The definition of science is actually not established. There's a whole book called What is This Thing Called Science? That was the first book we had to read in philosophy of science. People get PhDs in the demarcation problem of defining science. You can get a whole PhD in it. That was initially my goal, to go to get my PhD in the demarcation problem. So where do we draw the line? What is science and what is not science? Some people, for example, I'm just giving an example, would say that psychology is science, and some would say it's not. Well, where do you draw the line, right? Those are the kind of debates they have amongst themselves. So the focus on the class, though, other than discussing what is science, was to talk about the theory of evolution. That was the next thing we discussed in the class. We spent about 10 weeks discussing the view of evolution, and then we talked about creationism, and we talked about intelligent design, because they are slightly different in terms of one of them just telling you there's design, and the other one that speaks more clearly about God being the creator of the heavens and the earth. And then the end of the course, which is kind of a sad ending, basically the idea was, after all of this, the book we read at the end was called Living with Darwin. And the idea is, after all of this is where we are. This is it. We got to live with Darwin. And of course, I wrote in my papers that I didn't agree. I made my case. And as I said, my professor was still appreciative, even though we didn't agree on all of it. But that was the last book we read, which was by a philosopher out of Columbia University. But the philosophy of science tries to explain how science works. Science tries to help us make sense of the universe. It helps us make sense of, it's a tool that you try to use to better understand the world that you live in. But there's something fascinating. So I took philosophy of science. So again, I started in my junior year, but because of how interested I was in trying to break this down, trying to explain where the Christian faith comes in, I ended up doing all the coursework for the remaining year and a half of what I needed to do over the course of the whole degree. So I just did a lot of work over Christmas and so on and so forth, trying to study more. And so I wrote a lot of papers in epistemology and so on and so forth. But in epistemology, which is the field of philosophy that deals with how do you know what you know, and how do you know that what you know is knowable, because not everything can be known, and some things are not knowable. And I'm sorry, philosophers need to get jobs. But anyways, but the point is, we're dealing with how do you know that what you know is knowable. And a man by the name of David Hume wrote a book, An Inquiry into Human Understanding. Sorry, this is a little bonus. I forgot to tell them his name yesterday. But David Hume basically spent all this time, he's the most read English philosopher, and he says at the end of the day, in some ways, that he didn't even know if he existed. And there are people who do not believe they exist, by the way. It's not strange. Some people do not believe they exist, and some people do not believe that the material world exists. These are things that do exist, okay? So I'm just warning you, in case you sit next to one of them on the plane, just don't talk to them. But the idea is, no, do talk to them, but it will be an interesting conversation. And so the idea is, and this is what I want to emphasize, okay? There's something called the phenomenon, and then there's the explanation for the phenomenon. There is a debate whether or not the theory of gravity is sufficient to explain the phenomenon of if I drop this, it drops down. That's the phenomenon. Are we debating the phenomenon? I don't think that needs to be debated, correct? The explanation can be debated. Are Newton's equations accurate? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, we can discuss the explanation of the phenomenon. Now, here's what's interesting. The theory of evolution as a phenomenon has not been established. And yet there's a theory trying to explain it. How do you explain something that is on slippery ground already, and then tell people in their schools that they have no right to ask questions? That's not science, though. Because science should give people an opportunity to ask questions. And now we have many young people who are being told that this is the only way. You evolved, and there's no other discussion. But that's not true. And we need to encourage our young people to do their research, to read the books they need to read, watch less of the things they watch, and actually spend more time learning and digging deep, and then being able to ask questions of people, of their science teachers and so on and so forth in a polite manner. And maybe some of these teachers will think about what they're teaching. And so the phenomenon is in question. So the reason why I mention this is David Hume in his book does talk about this issue of things that are, you have a phenomenon and you have to give an explanation. He spends a whole chapter on miracles. They try to explain the question of, are things miracles, or is it just things that we haven't fully understood that we're saying that they're miracles, right? And they go into all of those details. Yes, it was interesting to learn some of that, but a lot of the days were really sad when you had to be proving that you existed. So anyways, that was some of what epistemology did for me, and it was interesting to go into that world. But science has limits, and there's a whole book on it called The Limits of Science. There's another book by another scientist, mathematician, John Lennox, that addresses that same topic. I won't go into that now. But what is science? Again, science is essentially like a tool that studies, at the simplest level, people might say living and non-living things. That's not very accurate. But science tries to give explanations to things that are somewhat of a pattern, that have a repeatability to them. We say experiments. But again, that explanation is also being debated. So at this point, as I said, there's a whole debate. But science, we get the idea, the general idea of what it is, broken down into chemistry, physics, mathematics, and all those have, mathematics is the fundamental, and then chemistry, physics, chemistry, biology. But we know the general scope. The specifics would be another day's discussion. But what is truth? If truth cannot change, and science is trying to study things that discuss the truth, then we need to understand what truth is. And truth is what corresponds to reality. That came from some Greek philosophers, by the way. They say the correspondence to reality. So if this is reality and something corresponds to it, we say that it is truth. And reality is simply what is, period. That's all reality is. Whatever what is, that's the reality. And so if we try to find out who stole this from the kitchen, or who did this and that, who stole the cookies, we would say the reality is John did it. But if you have 5 people debating, they might be saying, well, what is the truth of the matter? And they give their evidence for all these people. But even if John is not one of the candidates, that means none of them has intersected with the truth. I mean, the truth hasn't come to light. So sometimes people can be close to something that looks like the truth. But until that thing matches with reality, truth has not been found. One of the famous examples of a mathematician on this issue with science and truth and so on is science can tell us what happens when you push Control A on a computer. Now I'm using it metaphorically. What I mean is if you push Control A on a computer, it highlights all. When you push Control C, it copies. Control V will paste what you've copied. So science can tell you that if you push Control A, it would highlight all. But science cannot tell you why it must do that. There's a programmer behind it. Science can explain to you the chemistry, the physics, and the biology of a cake. If I had a cake sitting here, it could tell you everything about the nature of the cake. But if somebody came and said, who is this cake for and for what occasion? Science can't tell you that. Now somebody needs to reveal it to you. So revelation is important. And that's part of why the Christian faith carries so much weight, because God revealed himself to us. There's certain things we wouldn't know if God didn't reveal it to us. And that's a big part of Christianity. God revealed himself to us. And so when the epistemologists and the philosophers are arguing whether we can know this, that, and the other, what we need to remind them is there is revelation. And that's part of why we know what we know. And of course, God has revealed himself through his word. He's revealed himself through his creation. Quickly, I want to say this about something called, it's scienticism, but extreme scienticism. The idea that science is all that there is, and some people put their whole lives on it, is very dangerous because, again, science itself has not been established as to what it fully is. And so I just give a warning. I tell people science does not give the why. It can just tell us some of the things that would happen when we do certain things. So how big is the universe, as I said earlier? So the universe is almost too large to comprehend. Someone once said, if a light year is about 9 trillion kilometers, and we are about 46 billion light years. That means that if you drove from, again, this person used the California example, from Los Angeles to San Diego, about 100 miles. If you did that 100 billion times, and then you did that for 46 billion years, you would be halfway across the universe. That's how massive the universe is. I mean, it's almost hard to even comprehend that, right? You guys keep hearing we're finding things out there, way out there, and so on and so forth. We know that some people have asked the question, what does science tell us about God? Even to society, people were asking that question back in the early 90s. What does science tell us about God? Because some things are just strange. So now let's see what some scientists said about God, or about the nature of the universe. This is one of them, a Nobel Prize winner, Richard Feynman. Why nature is mathematical is, again, a mystery. The fact that there are rules at all is a kind of miracle. Okay? It's a kind of miracle. The Christian steps back and says, God's hand was involved. And this picture you're seeing here, there's something called the Fibonacci sequence, which is observed in the back of snails and some other things. So that we see a sequence where there's a series of numbers. You start with one number, and then one is the first number, and then 1 plus 1 is 2. So then you take that number 2 and put it at the end. Then you add 2 plus 1, you get 3. 3 plus 2, you get 5. You keep adding it. And when you do the diagram, it actually comes out to a spiral that is seen in nature. So the Fibonacci sequence, that's one of them. And then Albert Einstein made a very interesting quote that ties into what I said. He says, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. Now remember what I said about the intelligibility of the universe, right? Albert Einstein, of course, born in 1879, had an interesting life story in terms of things here and there. That's another day's story, I guess, is some of what he came across, some of the things that he discovered. And today, we look at Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. They've poured forth speech. And it was just a few years ago, people talked about gravitational waves, which Einstein had predicted. And some of that almost lining up with the fact that the universe declares the glory of God. Like there's singing going on in the universe of some kind. I'm not a specialist in quantum cosmology or quantum physics, but I will tell you that it is interesting when some things start lining up. So it's not like what you're finding is disproving the Bible. It's just lining up with some things the Bible said. Even Genesis 1:1. Scientists finally just said, okay, we get it in the 1900s. But at some point, some people said the universe never had a beginning. And some people didn't want to believe in a beginning, because if you believe in a beginning, the Christians might be right on something. And they were right. They predicted a long time ago that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And now science is trying to catch up. So I wouldn't put my faith in science if I were you. Okay, so Eugene Wigner. Again, science has some good things to offer, but it has a lot of limits. He said the enormous usefulness of mathematics in the natural sciences is something bordering on the mysterious, and that there is no rational explanation for it. If everything happened by chance, why do some things just make sense? Why do some things line up? These are some constants and equations in mathematics. Galileo famously said mathematics is a science the language in which God has written the universe. Or another way he put it is mathematics is the language of science. We see all these constants, we see all these equations. Some of these are more in quantum mechanics. But the idea is we see equations, we see things, and they seem to make sense. Why do they make sense? These are questions that scientists constantly ask. Let's see from another one, Sir Fred Hoyle, a Cambridge cosmologist. A common sense interpretation of the data suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology. We know that it's not just someone who monkeyed with it. We know that God created the heavens and the earth. But people who do not have their faith in him are left puzzled. And this is one of the things they're talking about. So, we know that creation is a fact. We know that there's evidence for creation. So I want to take a step now and bring us into some practical implications. And then we're going to go back to mathematics and wrap it up from the mathematical perspective. If creation is true, and if the evidence is there, and we know that it's true, what does that mean for a Christian? What does that mean for my life? How now shall I live? How now shall we live? We need to live lives of purpose, number one, because we were created. And if I was created, then I should not fit the statistic that says that I read a statistic about young people, and some of them want to watch TV for 10 hours a day or whatever, or social media. And I'm saying, if I was created, I probably don't need 10 to 12 hours a day on Facebook, right? It doesn't make sense. If I was created, I have a purpose, right? And my purpose is not just to scroll people's lives all day. Unfortunately, people live lives, even those who say I'm a Christian, and they just waste it. No purpose. We need to strive to live lives of purpose. Somebody here might be saying, oh, you're judging me. Stop judging me. Oh, no, I'm not picking you out, but today is the day to change, so you can change that tonight. But, and so number one is we need to live lives of purpose. Number two, we need to live lives of focus, because we know that our lives matter. It's different if I didn't think my life mattered, but it does. So I should focus my life to line up with what God has created me to do. And in the general sense, Christians have no excuse. We're called to shine the light of Jesus Christ, to be ambassadors wherever we go. If I'm going to be a doctor, then I'm going to be a doctor that knows Jesus Christ and shines his light as best as I can in whatever setting I can. And I say that, of course, because sometimes the person you're treating might even be unconscious, and so they might not see that light, but hopefully other people see that light that you're working with. And so that you have in you. So he says, let your light so shine before men. We need to shine the light of Christ. My prayer is that we're like Daniel, that even when we shine the light in places where people are afraid, oh, if I shine the light, I might lose my job or whatever. You're like Daniel. They're scared to do anything to you, because they're like, if something happens to him, we're in trouble, right? And Daniel, of course, exhibited a life of excellence. He didn't question his creator. He knew why he lived, and he lived for the glory of God. And that's my hope and prayer for us today. And so we should need to live lives of proper prioritizing, putting God first, as it says in Matthew 6, and the gospel needs to shine forth in all things. And then we need to live lives of humility. Those are some of the implications of creation. Now I'm going to use logic to prove or to back up my claim why people should live like this. In logic, there's something called deductive reasoning, where you have to lay down the premises and then you have a conclusion. The premises I'm using are, number one, whatever was willfully created has a purpose. We were willfully created. Therefore, we have a purpose for our existence. If premise 1 and 2 are true or valid, then the conclusion is valid. So is the conclusion valid? Yes, because we've established that we were willfully created. God spoke and it came into being. The neat thing about creation, again, is time, matter, and all of that had to exist or come into being by someone outside of it. So it's almost like everybody has to bring their resume. How did this universe come? You can't get something from nothing, so someone or something has to make nothing into something. And so when they bring their resumes, it's just beautiful and cool. It's really amazing to see how God has described. We look at who God is, and everything we're trying to talk about in terms of how our universe came into being, we find that God is the one who could have made those things happen. Not only did the universe come into being, it came into being with order. It came into being with design. So the one who made it had to have a mind that could create and design. Not only was he eternal outside of time, but he also has to have the ability to create order. There's several things that have to come into place, and we see all of them lining up in who God is. So one of the implications of creation, again, is that we use our talents. And so one of the other things I want to hit home tonight. So number one, I want to remind us of the comprehensibility of the universe, the fact that it can be comprehended. That in and of itself is a miracle, which brings us back to who our Creator is. We know we were created. We know we have a purpose. So this is the other take home. What has he given you? What are the talents and the abilities and the things he's giving you? Some people have, and it talks about some of this in Romans 12, and of course in 1 Corinthians 12, different gifts. But Romans 12 specifically, what I'm referring to is some people have the gift of mercy, excess mercy. Some people do not know how to be mean. They just can't. They have an excess of mercy. Some have an excess of a gift of giving. People have different gifts. Whatever your gift is, you have to dial in and seek to find ways to use it and find people that you can pour into. Because we live in a day and time, unfortunately, in America, where there are many people who have no direction. And all it would take, in a sense, is somebody to mentor them or guide them. My quick plug for that is we need the young people to teach some of the older people how to use smartphones while the older people teach them about life. I think it's a good deal, right? And so we can, invite them and, hey, teach me how to use this phone. And then I'm going to teach you some things about life. And it's a very sad time in history. I remember reading one time on Father's Day that there's over 8 million households without fathers in America. And I thought, wow, that is just tough. The number of kids growing up without a father. And that's where we are in this nation. So we have work to do. That's part of the moral of that story. But I want to now turn my attention to something I'm pretty passionate about. And if I get too excited, somebody tell me to cool down. Well, this is mathematics. I am excited about science and all of that. But one of the things about math is it comes in such a pure form. It's not diluted like some of the other some other aspects of science, right? We're talking about math and precision. Some people are talking theory of evolution. It's like, really? I mean, what are you talking here? Fantasy land. Let's stick to facts and details. And so let's talk about a little bit about mathematics and how these people use their talents, some of them very clearly, to the glory of God. They made that clear. And let's look at a few of them. These are some of my favorite mathematicians. The ones that are highlighted here in bold were professing Christians. Some of the other ones, I don't know as much about their faith story. I do know that Gauss has showed up in some books as well, or as some discussion as a professing Christian. But in mathematics, if you look at some of the rankings for the most prolific and the best mathematicians, quote unquote, there's three names that keep up coming up. Carl Friedrich Gauss, he came up with arithmetic progression. Some of you might remember. He tells you if you add a number 1 plus 2 plus 3, he could tell you what your sum will be based on what numbers you're adding. He came up with that as a little boy, probably close to the elementary school. He was a prodigy. He was unique. But that's number one. He's tied at number one with two other people. Leonhard Euler, E, compound interest, is named after Euler, the E. And then, even though he didn't necessarily come up with some of the details, but his teacher did, but he came up with over 96 things in mathematics. So it's like, you might as well give him that one. And then Isaac Newton, most of you know. Newton, math and physics combined, is probably one of the most brilliant minds the world has ever seen. He wasn't a prodigy, by the way. He worked hard. And that's something we need to emphasize with people who say, oh, I don't have the math brain. Oh, no, some people just work hard and they do well. Hard work works out pretty nice. Unfortunately, this generation might have some challenges with that because things are too easy. But anyways, that's that. I just say that because we have 2 days shipping and all these easy things out there. We need to teach them how to work hard even in the midst of those things. So, René Descartes influenced some of these guys by his writings. He has been also put in some faith books as far as I know. But part of what I want to do now is I want to look at these three briefly. And then, as I said, we'll wrap it up. And I'll turn it back over to John here shortly. But let's look at these mathematicians, and this will hopefully bring it all together. We're looking at the unchanging nature of truth, the fact that God created the heavens and the earth, and he left his imprint on the world, which we can discover, and those things bring us back to him. And we should allow all these tools to be resources that point us back to God and look at how we can appreciate the world that he has made. And so let's look at a few things from these people. And then I included Johannes Kepler, and I talked about Einstein earlier. Newton talked about the idea that if he has seen great things, it is because he stood on the shoulders of giants. And this is one of the quotes that Newton made, which, by the way, Galileo Galilei died the year Newton was born. And Newton was born on Christmas Day, by the way, in 1642. It's interesting, which I look at that too, and I just think that's kind of cool. But Galileo was a giant, okay? And if you don't know Galileo, you can check him out. But he was one of those who led for, the Copernican revolution after Copernicus established that. And he stood for the fact that the Earth was not in the center of the solar system, but the sun was. And so Newton said this. He said, I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have only, like a boy, playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then finding a smoother pebble or prettier shell than ordinary, while the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. So Newton is saying, I've just been playing on the seashore, and there's a great ocean of truth. And I say, no, Newton, stop being too modest. That's not true. We're still using what you did. And so I don't know what you mean by the great ocean of truth. But Newton did some amazing things. The telescope, optics, mechanics, waves, heat. We could go on and on. Calculus by 25. People are, with whatever plague was going on, he was at home, he was taking a break, decided, why don't we come up with equations to help us better understand the solar system? Anyways, that's not what most kids would do if they had a snow day, but that's what Newton did. And so Isaac Newton lived from 1642 to 1727. He talked about standing on the shoulders of giants to see further. He was quoting somebody else. This is René Descartes. I only mention him because some of his writings influenced. Einstein read, and Newton read Descartes' books or Descartes' writing. He died at 54, pretty young, but he was the father of coordinate geometry. If you guys know XY plane, came up with some of that. That's why it's called the Cartesian plane. This is Isaac Newton. As I said, he came up with quite a few things, or was involved in quite a few things back in the 16 and 1700s. This is one of the fields, optics, you guys know about. He actually looked at the sun one time until he went blind for a few days because of how much he wanted to understand how the world worked. I don't recommend that at all. And then apparently Newton also said, Plato is my friend, Aristotle is my friend, my greatest friend is truth. He wrote more in theology than he did in physics. And Newton wrote a lot in physics. But he actually had an interest in theology, and he wrote a lot more on that. This is one of the quotes from Isaac Newton. The unchanging nature of truth. God created the world. It doesn't matter what time you live in. But this is one of the things that Newton said in the Principia. And the Principia, and I'm not making it up, you can go home and Google it, it's one of the greatest books ever written in academia, period. It's one of the greatest books ever written in science or mathematics because he talks about gravity. He goes into some details. It's free if you want to read it online. I haven't read the whole thing. Maybe when I retire, I'll do it. But the idea is he writes all these details and then he comes to this point and he says, though these bodies may indeed continue in their orbits by the mere laws of gravity, they could by no means have at first derived their regular position of the orbits from these laws, or from those laws. Thus, this most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. He goes on to quote a few psalms after this, or a few passages. This is one of the greatest books ever written in science. This is a science book. But that's what he had to say towards the end of his book. The laws that govern the universe cannot be used to define how the things came to be in the first place. Something has to explain how they got there. And so, as C.S. Lewis said in his book, Mere Christianity, atheism is too simple. It doesn't answer the questions. So, someone says, I don't believe in God. Well, how do you explain the universe coming to being? Well, I don't know. Well, then you can't exclude God from the equation. You can't be an atheist then, because you haven't found the answer to the fundamental questions. Why are we here? Where are we headed? What's the meaning of life? What determines right and wrong? You can't answer those. And yet you exclude the one who has the answers to all things. So Newton said this. I appreciate his work. He did a lot of things. We're not going to go into detail. There's books on him. My favorite mathematician is Euler. I just have to say that. Newton had a little bit of temper problem here and there. So I stick with Euler. But Euler lived from 1707 right around the end of Newton's life to the end of his life. I bring him up again. 96 things in mathematics at least. Including one of the things I'm about to show you, which might be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in mathematics, and that came from Euler. He was classmates with Daniel Bernoulli, Bernoulli's principle. So Daniel Bernoulli worked on Bernoulli's principle. His father was their teacher. Daniel actually did better than his father at one point, and apparently his father got mad at him and didn't like him anymore. But that's not typical, okay? So if your children do better than you, encourage them rather than banishing them. But so anyways, the Bernoulli family has a whole drama. Somebody should make a whole series about it. We'll talk about some of them briefly before we wrap it up and bring it all together. So he's the most published, one of the most published. He went blind in both eyes at one point in his life, towards the end of his life, and he published 50 papers as a blind mathematician in a year. People don't publish 50 papers with two eyes in 50 years sometimes. He did that in 1 year. That's how gifted he was. But he wasn't necessarily a prodigy. Graduated college maybe at 15, so he wasn't a prodigy. But, and I know that sounds strange. Yeah, people should be able to, if they wanted to, graduate at 17. College, I mean. Our education system really duplicates things unnecessary. But that's not today's topic. Sorry, back to the topic at hand. So Blaise Pascal, mathematician, physicist, he wrote a book called Pensis, one of the greatest books in apologetics. The unit of pressure is Pascal. When you check your tire pressure, what did Pascal? He died at 39, invented a calculator about 18 to help his father with his tax collection business. Interesting where the standards of society have gone. He was only about 18 or 19 when he did that. And some of that still helps us today. Again, as I said, died at 39, but look what he could have done, what he did with his life. He also believed that God had created him for doing mathematics, and that was pretty neat to see. This is just a quick slide to show you. There's about 7 Bernoulli brothers here, about 7 or 8 of them. These are all mathematicians from one family line, the Bernoulli family. And so the father, as I said, got mad at his son Daniel, who was Euler's friend or classmate. But then we had Johann II, Johann III, Jacob II, Jacob I, Johann I. But there's so many Bernoullis, and they pretty much ran the show. I believe that some of them did get married into the Curie family, which is another interesting thing there. This is the most beautiful thing you probably see in a long time. E is a transcendental number, and I'm going to go forward and come back. E is 2.71828, and it goes on forever. Pi is a transcendental number, 3.14159, and goes on forever. We've gone up to about 10 trillion digits of pi, right? We have these computers that are calculating the next number and the next number. And people tell me sometimes, I've memorized pi to 10 places. I'm like, that's not impressive. As a matter of fact, you don't need to be memorizing it to 10 places when we have so many digits of it on our computers. We don't need that. However, it's transcendental. Do you agree and understand what I'm saying? It goes on forever. I is an imaginary number which is equal to the square root of -1. Smartphones actually work partly because of because of complex analysis. But now we're going to go back. We took a transcendental number, E, a number that doesn't end. We raised it to the power of an imaginary number, the square root of -1. We multiplied that by a transcendental number. We added 1 and the answer is 0. Or we do it this way. E to the I pi is equal to -1. All of that equals -1. I've heard some physicists say, I'm beginning to think there might be a God after seeing that. I've actually heard people say that. There might be something about this universe, but that's sure strange. Now, the proof for this, there's 2 proofs. Again, Euler did the work. It's called Euler's identity. Some of you might have heard of the movie Hidden Figures. They were trying to land a rocket back, and it was going in a parabolic motion, and apparently they wanted it to change to an elliptical motion. I don't know if anybody remembered in the movie, but somebody said, I think someone solved that. Euler's formula, if you remember. Back to Euler again. This guy lived in the 1700s, guys, okay? He didn't have Netflix. It helped a lot. Anyways, and I don't watch Netflix, but I just say that because I think if you don't have some things, it actually increases how much you can accomplish. So, Euler's identity. And what do people have to say about Euler? I was reading the introduction of his book, Elements of Algebra, readily available free online. This is what his student had to say, one of his people who lived with him. He could not keep away from speaking the truth. In that his Christianity was very evident, and there was no question about what this man stood for. And in many circles, you could check anywhere. Well, the best mathematician, or we can say, let's be kind and say the top 3. He's tied with the other 2. The best mathematician, one of the best the world might have ever known, didn't have to lay down his belief in the truth of God's word in order to take up and use all his gifts to the max with mathematics and science. They are not incompatible, and I know you know that. But our culture is brainwashing too many people to think that they are. They go together. Science works because people realize that the universe had some sort of design to it. So they went to investigate. Robert Boyle, Isaac Newton, Leonard Euler, as I said, Gauss, Pascal. We can go on and on with all these scientists that did not give up their faith because they realized that if something is true, it remains true. And truth has that eternal nature to it. So anyways, that's Euler. Someone made this funny picture online and said, if you look in the dictionary for beauty, it should say that, which is Euler's identity. That's how beautiful it is. It should actually say that's beauty. Okay, so we can go on and on about Fibonacci sequence of functions and all the realities in the world, but it all goes back to, and even the MRI machine, Dr. Raymond Demadian, a believer, and still involved in biophysics. I mean, this is, and some people say, he didn't invent it. Well, actually, if you Google it, it actually brings him up on many websites. So whether or not, quote unquote, he invented it, he made the first body MRI scanner that was used, and he's still involved as far as I know. I'm actually reading some of his biography now. But to think that somebody would sit there and come up with ideas of, and I'm sure he learned from those before him, don't get me wrong, but somehow, there's hydrogen in a person and we can move the hydrogen with this and that, and we can get it moving in this direction and processing and doing all these details, and somehow that will create an image. That's pretty amazing. Now, on that list of mathematicians, there was one I didn't talk about, but I put him there intentionally, by the name of Fourier. The reason why we're able to see the images at the end of the day in so many of these modalities, in nuclear medicine, in MRI, is because of Fourier transforms, which were done. I mean, this guy existed a long time ago. But it's amazing to see how God has, again, given us tools. These are like bonuses for just being in his world. And this mathematics can then be taken and used. And today, when you get an MRI scan, thank a mathematician. It all goes back to the math people. And then the mathematicians, of course, should thank the one who has given them the ability to do what they do. So let's bring it all together and then we'll take questions. My goal and dream is to start several STEM academies, I call them. I call them Euler STEM academies. And the idea is, yes, we want to have schools, but we also want to have methods of education. And I want to pass that on to homeschool families. I want to pass that on to different settings. So I've written some math programs, and I'm hoping more and more to involve homeschool families to reduce the amount of time that is wasted in our current math programs. to remove the summer breaks, because that's the worst thing that happened to America. You cannot try to compare us to other countries when they're doing math 12 months out of the year. That's just a waste of time. How do you compare a free throw shooter from one who's practicing all summer and the one who never practiced? They don't even try it. So when we complain that we're number 26, well, look at what we're doing. Give them 3 months off and then repeat the last 3 months in the first 3 months. That's a waste of time. Anyways, so my goal is, let's raise the standard. Let's give our young people responsibility and help them to be the best that they can be. To be like Euler. Not necessarily to copy him, but to be like him in that they're exerting all their gifts and talents for the glory of God. And so that's what Euler STEM Academy is. And I end and I leave you with this passage. When you get a chance, you read that from Isaiah 40. But it basically says, who has taught the Lord? Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord or given him counsel? Nobody. He is the one who can stretch the heavens, right? He's the one who has made the world out of nothing. And the last part of the verse, have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. God is the one that we follow. He's the one whose truth will always remain. Math, science, logic will all point back to the one who made it all. And because he made it, we can explore his world. My friends, truth never changes. So because we know God has been, he's there. And no matter what we're going through, we remember that he was there and he's still there even when life is difficult. He doesn't just somehow cease to exist. He's still there, and the question should then become, Lord, what are you doing in the midst of my suffering? And so I hope that we take that home. We go back and look at all the talents and gifts he's given us, and we encourage our young people not to buy to the drum of the culture, not to buy to the ideas of the culture where things change all the time, and now we're going to support this, now we're going to support that. No, we stick with the truth of God's word, which remains, and if we do that, we will be just fine. Unfortunately, our culture is experimenting on many fronts, and it's not going to be funny. And our young people need to learn to stand on the truth before the culture loses its mind completely, as it has done already. Thank you for your time.
Amen.